Hello everybody, my name is Lucas with Ryze. I recently had the opportunity to interview Tony Fahkry. He's an author and personal coach from Australia who works with individuals to help them discover their true passions and become better versions of themselves. He's the author of Awaken Your True Self, The Power to Navigate Your Life, and Reconstructing the Past to Create a Remarkable Future. Tony is also the creator of the online course, How to Build Powerful Relationships, with links included in the description and the accompanying post. It was an honor to speak with Tony, and it's an opportunity to share his wisdom with you today. Let's dive right in. First off, I did want to say thanks for doing this, and again, and it was actually really cool to put together that article of all of those Medium posts. It was fun to reach out to everybody and let them know. So it's been fun to kind of have these little conversations. I'm really glad you took the time to do this. But so I'm curious, if you don't mind, Tony, telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into coaching.
Yeah. So essentially, it started many years ago after working as a personal trainer. So that was my introduction into coaching. And prior to that, Lucas, I spent many years working in the fashion industry. And so the introduction into personal training was almost a career change. And subsequently, from the personal training came the opportunity where a client invited me to address their corporate company. And so it really grew from speaking and then subsequently into coaching.
Nice. Okay, interesting. So did you have, I guess you said you started in the fashion industry. What was something that made you switch?
I guess the switch came for me when my father passed away from type 2 diabetes. It's now going on to 2 decades ago. But it was really interesting because it started this insight or this quest or search. And it was, why do some people die and others maintain a long and healthy life? And for my father, he was fairly young. He was 64, and he was a migrant who immigrated from the Middle East to Australia. And so there was a complete change in his way of life. So it really got me thinking, why do people go on this quest and maintain health while others struggle with it? And so really it was just trying to understand that, and that led me on this journey of health and well-being. And then alongside that came this quest to understand the self-empowerment and self-improvement. So how could I put these two avenues together and really help people to enrich their lives?
Wow. Wow. So that I can see that being a pretty powerful change then. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess then along those lines, it sounds like there's been a lot of change that's happened. I guess I'm curious, what maybe something that you've learned that you said that you were kind of wanted to put those journeys together, or on the journey you wanted to kind of figure out those ways that kind of make people healthy and that well-being. What maybe some of the highlights that you've learned on that front?
Well, I guess I've learned many things along the way, and I interviewed thousands of people along that journey, and it was not only one-on-one, but working in an audience capacity as well. And that really stemmed the basis for the first book I wrote, which was a program called The Power to Navigate Life. And some of the things I learned is that our past doesn't dictate the future, and that is people, and I know it's an axiom or an adage that many people often hear, and there is a lot of truth to it insofar as we often believe that if we've had an illness in the past, or if we've had a failure, or if we've had a failed relationships or failed business, then that is going to dictate the course of our life. And in fact, that is actually a stepping stone in order to prevail. It is a symptom, much like a headache is a symptom of not drinking enough water. Our past is a symptom. Yet if we keep bringing it into the present moment, then it'll continue to become or evolve into a disease.
Wow. Yeah. No, I know I've actually experienced that myself, even in doing certain things. You kind of think about it and you're like, this doesn't have to define me. And so I can move forward from that. So that's interesting. Well, I guess I guess then, do you have any personal stories on maybe how some relationships helped you kind of get to where you are, or even kind of understand or come to this realization or understanding?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, whilst I can't recount any particular stories, I do have an incredible amount of mentors and coaches that have helped me get to this point in time. So I never say it's one person. And whilst it can be one person that can change the course of your career or your life, for me personally, it's been a matter of having a team of people, and each person has served a purpose. So whether it be a mentor, 3 or 4 years ago, pardon me, I had an incredible business mentor who helped me develop a program that became a book. And then I had personal mentors or even teachers that were clients. Even children. I have nephews and nieces who are under the age of 8. They are incredible teachers because they help you to learn how to be grounded and present, in the present moment. So everyone is a teacher. It's just, are you willing to learn from them, and are you open to learn? And that's a really an important point, I guess.
No, it's funny. So it's funny that you say children, because
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought about that. And you kind of mentioned a team. Are there any, I guess, types of people that you would recommend that like we kind of keep ourselves associated with just for like a healthy balance or a kind of perception correction?
Yeah, well, they often say that, you are the sum of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. Have you
Yeah,
heard that
yeah, yeah,
expression?
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's difficult because if we surround ourselves with childhood friends who, and I'll say in inverted commas, can be toxic, it's difficult to let go of those friends because there's that sense, well, we've been childhood friends for so long. But it's really just being mindful of the company that you keep, and just being mindful of how these people actually influence your life, whether they be professional or whether they be personal. And are they contributing to your personal development and self-improvement? But also, it's a two-way street. And are you contributing to their personal growth and development? So it has to be, they often say that relationships, and this is where I, point to differ, are about, two meeting points together. Yet the problem with that analogy is that if one relationship crumbles away, then you're only left with one partner. So I like to think of relationships as this crossover. And that is, if the relationship crumbles, then at least you've got the other person on the other side there to help you pick up and take over and step in. So relationships are about a union and not meeting points. They are certainly a meeting point when we begin, but they are then about melding together.
Absolutely. That's can you still hear me?
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
okay. Sorry, look, I got froze there for a second. No, that's really interesting because I guess then maybe taking this a step further, how do you see that in the play of, I guess, kind of these like loose ties relationships? Just kind of people that you've casually met, maybe friends of friends or events that you go to. How do you see
Mm.
that kind of dynamic?
Yeah. Well, Lucas, I guess that all relationships serve a purpose, whether they be in transient relationships, whether they be intermittent. It's sometimes, there's all these, internet memes that go out on, Instagram and so forth that say, people come into your life for a season or a reason. But it's really about not attaching ourselves to the relationship. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we can often have the best relationships when they're momentary. For example, the other day I was in a cafe and I shared a glance with a person. And it was just this sense of oneness. And it was just not even a smile. It was just a closed mouth smile, and it was just this shared union of something that happened. The barista dropped, the mug, and, he was really confounded. And I looked over to someone and they could recognize their pain. And it was this shared sense of empathy towards that person. And the cafe was really busy. So those sort of connections mean something to us, and it's about being present in that moment and recognizing, wow, this is a shared moment with a person. Yet they can be deeper, where we've got relationships, whether they be marriage or professional relationships that last years. It's understanding the dynamics of the relationship.
I really like that aspect of I guess, kind of the perception change of that no matter what, this is a shared moment between two people.
Yeah.
And so it kind of, I guess I don't want to say takes, not to say that those types of situations are anxiety driven, but I just know a lot of people can get uncomfortable. And it's like, well, you're both sharing that moment together. So that's kind of interesting. And it kind of takes away that, like, I guess, need to fill it in some way, shape, or form, and that you can kind of be present and be mindful and just be aware of the relationship as it is, even if it's just a first meeting. Hey, how's it going? We're sharing this experience together.
Yeah, and I think what often stops us from engaging in those relationships, Lucas, is that we bring some level of conditioning to that interaction. So you're bringing your history of your upbringing, your familial relationships, whether you've had any failed relationships, they're all stored memories and they become stored emotions. And I'm bringing my interactions. So every time two people come together, we're all bringing, if it were our own baggage. And so, we're interacting with our shared baggage. But sometimes we need to be mindful of that baggage and still interact. I mean, there's a great book that Susan Jeffers wrote that's the title is "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway," and it's really a metaphor that we've got to feel our pain and our past, yet be mindful of what is still happening in this present moment when we're interacting with others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. Okay. So I guess going kind of back to your coaching aspect, I guess I was going to ask, do you have a particular process that you kind of use to help people realize or understand kind of this higher potential? And then even maybe on a second note, how do you incorporate relationships into that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, when working with clients, it's really about helping them to understand whether there are any limiting beliefs. And so, of course, if we're bringing limiting beliefs into our interactions with relationships, where we're carrying across or bringing forth these paradigms or these stories or even narratives. And in my work with clients, it's really about helping them look at the beliefs. And so with coaching, it's shining the light, or if it were, reflecting the mirror. And so what I do in the coaching sessions is really about asking questions. And a lot of clients get probably a little bit of a distorted view because they turn up to the sessions thinking that I have all the answers. And in fact, I don't. I have my own wisdom and my own truth, and my own truth does not necessarily serve the client. So what I help them do is to draw on their own wisdom by asking questions. And these are questions that we are seldom often ask ourselves. And so what I talk about to people is this sense of, we've got to learn to come home to ourselves by becoming inquisitive and conducting self-inquiry. We might ask ourselves, how am I feeling today? How is that relationship going? How is my work relationship going? And just sit on it. You don't necessarily have to have an answer right away. It might come to you when you're in the shower or brushing your teeth. So, yeah, it's about shining the light on the client and helping them to discover their own answers.
So you mentioned limiting beliefs. Are there any particular ones that you've noticed are repetitive, maybe, that maybe some themes on these limiting beliefs? And then also, are there any themes in regard to relationships as well?
Yeah, sure. So the themes that I often notice are centered around the emotions such as fear. And they're generally limiting beliefs that stem from, if something happened in a certain way in my past, then it's sure to happen again in the future. And so what I really help clients to understand is to understand the mechanism of our thoughts and how we think. And so our hierarchical structures within our minds are generally associated with meaning. So we try and draw meaning on things, and we're meaning-making machines, because if something happens in our environment, we try to associate meaning to our own lives. And it's an evolutionary mechanism, and without going too much into it, it's really so it helps us discern whether there's imminent danger or it's safe. So if we're bringing along these beliefs from the past, it's really to protect us. Yet sometimes in the context of relationships, that may not necessarily be what's advantageous to our relationship. So to give you an example, if you've been hurt in the past in an intimate relationship, your natural belief and mechanism is to build a wall. And that wall is a protective mechanism. So if we look at it from the sense or the point of view of self-compassion and kindness and empathy, we are preserving our emotional well-being. Yet in the context of developing relationships, whether they be personal, intimate, familial or professional, that wall that we erect can often prevent or stop us from actually developing intimate relationships. And by intimate, I mean closer connections. Mm-hmm. So mindfulness means, Lucas, being aware that we have this limiting belief, that we have been hurt in the past, that we show some compassion to ourselves foremost, and we forgive ourselves, but we needn't necessarily carry that limiting belief, that hurt with us into the future.
So is that the way that basically you help, is that the way that you help clients effectively realize that, is saying, be aware of it, forgive it, and then don't take that with you into the next interaction?
Absolutely. And in fact, being aware of it is almost, most of the work. That's like the heavy lifting. That's like, walking into the gym and doing the weights. It's really the heavy lifting. When you are aware that you're doing it, then at least you become mindful of it. Now, how and when you choose to heal, that becomes the next process. Now, you may not be ready to heal those limiting beliefs now, but you may be ready in the next year. So the healing process will come, but first the awareness must take place.
That's interesting. It's funny kind of going into this conversation with this idea of, hey, let's talk about like relationship building. And then it really comes down to this aspect of, hey, how well do you understand yourself? And how true to you are you? So that's kind of funny how that's turned. I think it's fundamental. I really do. So I'm in line with a lot of what you're saying. So,
it was all the old, the Stoics, the Greek Stoics, always, promoted this sense of knowing oneself and, know thyself, grow thyself, and, through awareness and knowing who we are fundamentally. And that's why all these spiritual masters advocate this sense of loving yourself foremost, because if we can't love and understand ourselves first, then how are we to understand and even love other people?
No, that makes complete sense. I mean, yes, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Well, okay, then on that note of kind of this overcoming, do you have any stories from people that you've coached that maybe have overcome some hardship, or maybe were able to kind of build a relationship that wasn't there before to kind of get to a higher point or even reach a goal?
Sure. Yeah, there's a story that comes to mind of a client who I've been coaching now for possibly 4 years, and
wow.
I'll call her Sarah. It's not her real name, but just to protect her integrity. Yeah. So Sarah was working in a law firm and had a really difficult time with harassment within the culture, and it's a very we have this term in Australia that we use called blokey, and it's really masculine. In other words, and so it was quite dominated by this sense of blokiness. And so she really found it difficult in order to find her way within this company. And so eventually she left the business, she left the company and found a new position within another law firm. And things were completely different. So the dynamics of this new law firm, so the old law firm, the culture was really embedded in this masculine culture of, men in private clubs, and, they were, quite mature in age. And so it was a really different culture. In the new firm, the people were a lot younger. There was this openness, the culture was quite casual. However, because she'd been harassed in her previous job, she really found it difficult in her first interactions with her new employer, particularly her boss, to actually develop this sense of trust. And there were times when he'd question her on certain matters, and she really began to get her back up because she was sort of thinking, well, this might happen again. And so in our coaching sessions, it was really about helping Sarah understand that what happened in the past was a learning point for her, and what lessons could she gain from that experience, and that her limiting beliefs need not necessarily come across into this new relationship. Yeah. And that most people don't have agendas. So her new boss, he didn't have an agenda. Yeah. And so it was really just about awareness in Sarah's case, developing her own awareness and seeing that her past need not dictate her future.
No, that makes complete sense. Interesting. And I can see that really being a barrier to an interaction like that. And it's funny because that's a very like A to B type of situation, very, very causal, and you can see how that relationship or that limiting belief happened. I'd be more interested to know kind of to what extent we normally have from way back when that's influencing today that we don't even, have a direct experience of. So that's kind of that's a totally different tangent, but I can imagine that that those types of things are happening constantly that we're not aware of from previous expectations or previous interactions. Sorry.
Yeah, and they're safety mechanisms, and what's really important to understand, but also it takes the pressure off us too, Lucas, is that this is normal. I mean, Sarah would chastise herself because she thought, she was abnormal and she shouldn't be feeling this way. And that was creating her suffering. So it was really about saying, hey, Sarah, just stop. Those types of thinking is what is creating your suffering. It's fine. It's normal. It's natural to feel this way. And my coaching is really to help her to see why it's normal and to just relax. And when we relax, we can see that things are okay and that everything is working exactly as it should. And then we bring that relaxed sense into our interactions with others instead of bringing their baggage from the past as well.
And it's so to add on to that, I have just personally also experienced that even if you're not outwardly expressing maybe these thoughts, I've noticed that, this is maybe I'm an outlier, I don't know, but I can sometimes pick up on other people's anxiousness or sense of distrust. And so it kind of throws me off too. Or I know I've been in a position where I've thrown somebody else off because I just wasn't in the right mindset and they kind of picked up on it. So it kind of takes it to that step further of where, like you said, hey, you just got to chill. It's okay. Like,
chill, that's right. And body language is everything too, Lucas, isn't it? I mean, you just spoke about that same sense. And what tends to happen is our body language dictates a lot. And people can intuit that as well. And depending on how intuitive you are, you can feel that, whether it be a scowl or someone crossing their arms or not looking in your direction. These are all things and filters that we're gaining from our environment. But if we have our own filters, then those filters are clashing with the other person. So it's really just about, hey, chill out, just relax. It's okay. There's nothing to prove. You needn't get an outcome out of this interaction. or this relationship, just let it evolve. It may evolve, it may not evolve.
For sure.
And it's okay if it does or if it doesn't.
For sure. So, okay. No, that makes sense. So then I guess, how do you personally kind of best leverage, your understanding of relationships or the relationships themselves to achieve your own kind of personal goals?
Sure. So I guess for me, it's really about understanding the other person on a personal level, but also being inquisitive, curious, but genuinely having an interest in people. And I guess as a coach, for me, it's really comes down to helping people. So I am genuinely interested in people. One of my fascinating things is just understanding people's past and their lives and how they came to be this point. And I often talk about this with my mentor about, in the future writing a book, and it might be a book on, 200 people I've met and just, writing about their lives, because if we take an interest in people, then we soften our approach in our interaction with them. So for me, it's about personally having this win-win situation. And it's not a new idea. It's an idea that, the late Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about.
Yeah.
And that is, most people think that, Lucas has to win and Tony has to lose. And or vice versa. But what if Lucas wins and Tony wins? And he says in the book that if there was a relationship, whether it be personal or professional, where one person was winning and the other was losing, that he wouldn't do the relationship. He wouldn't enter into that relationship.
Yeah.
And he said that he always walked into a relationship where both parties win. And so winning doesn't necessarily mean financial or winning a contract. Winning might mean just, getting an appointment. So if we decided to book this appointment today, we might, come up with a mutual time that benefits us both. So that is a scenario of winning. Whereas if you'd said to me, this is the only time I can do, take it or leave it, then really I'm at the mercy of, your schedule, which means you win and I lose. So for me personally, it's about genuinely understanding people, genuinely liking people, but also understanding that we both must win in our interactions with one another.
I guess that kind of it's one of those, I don't want to say limiting factors, but it's one of those things that helps you focus,
Yes.
And so that's kind of how you prioritize, and that's how you get that best leverage. And I mean leverage in a positive sense, but
Yes.
in that, okay, I only want to focus on the aspects and relationships that we can both positively win from. So
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that. Okay, so I guess is that how you would recommend others do the same?
Yeah, so it's first of all, I would say even before understanding or applying that win-win situation is just to be genuinely concerned for other people. And concern means also going out of your way to help others first. And I know it's really difficult in these times because it's all about what's in it for me. How can this serve my own interest? And really, my coaching sessions with people and my talks and my writing is really about flipping the switch and changing the dynamics. And that is, hey, instead of focusing on yourself first, be of service foremost. And that is give more, exceed people's expectations, do more than is required of you. And I assure you, it will come back to you tenfold. And I know it flies in the face of what popular culture espouses, because these days, with these, celebrities espousing this, narcissism and this sense of selfishness about, feeding my agenda, and then that way you will grow and prosper. My approach is different, and that is help other people prosper first, and then you will grow, or you will grow at the same time as you help people. Because when you're of service to other people, again, my beliefs is that when you're of service, you develop the character to grow. Yet if you are the person that is receiving and taking all the time, then you develop this narcissistic, ego-based character, which is all about how can I serve my own interests. So
Yeah.
my coaching is about flipping the switch and helping people to develop this genuine interaction with others and understand the other person foremost, as a way to help you also advance.
Nice. No, that makes complete sense, because I mean, it's just even the things that I have learned is that it's a matter of, and I'm only 23, so even though I'm not of the most value to most people, as a 23-year-old, I have noticed that being helpful, and even at the very minimum being open to being helpful has been, at least it's already come back to me in different ways. So I get that, in that sense of and then combining that with the being genuinely interested in people, it helps facilitate that, positive relationship, just you like me, I like you kind of thing. And then I'm open and willing to help you. You've got a great starting point for kind of building a better relationship down the road.
Absolutely. And Lucas, just as an extra point to that, what I think it's about is it's a sense of being in the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we become who we are. And I often say to people, we need to, or we must learn to embody these characteristics within ourselves. So we need to be this person. They can't be strategies. And I often hear about both men and women within the context of relationships talk about strategies. How do I win this other person? How can I make him or her my girlfriend, boyfriend? And if we focus on strategies, what we've got to understand is that people aren't responsive to strategies. We need to become a way in the world. We need to become a person. And who we become is who we attract. So if we want more kindness, loving, compassion in our lives, we need to be that. But we need to be that to such an extent that, depending on the scale of how we advance along that, so it's almost a spectrum. So we can develop kindness and compassion to different spectrums. So if we consider a Buddhist monk as the highest spectrum, and we consider someone offering their place in a queue as the lowest spectrum, they're both, signs of compassion and still being in the world. Yeah?
Yes.
So if we develop these attributes and we become this person, then effectively we attract like-minded people. So for me, relationships and coaching is really just about teaching people how to become who they want to be in order to receive what they want in their lives.
Absolutely. Like I said it before, and I'll have to say it again, but it's shocking how much the relationships aspect and developing is dependent upon developing yourself first.
Yes.
And so it's just really interesting that it keeps coming back to that. So, no, cool. No, I definitely think that is probably either the most or the only way to really kind of continue to grow on that front. So I guess I have to ask my last question for you, Tony. If you had to start all over again, how would you kind of go about getting to where you were today? Kind of looking back on it all.
Yeah, great question, Lucas. So I guess there would possibly be 4 things that I would do again. And these aren't necessarily regrets, but, if I'm looking back and I've got a crystal ball, how would I improve, the future? And that is, firstly, I guess I would network more. And that's possibly been, I wouldn't say so much a downside or a downfall, but networking for me when I first started out was really about how can you help me? Whereas networking these days has come to encompass more about, hey, let's see if we actually connect. Let's see if we have mutual interests. But for me, I find it quite, or when I started, a process. I found it quite difficult because, you would turn up to these networking events and there might be 100 people and you're walking the room, drinking your, glass of red wine, and just looking for people that you thought that might, help you. So initially when I started, it was about me. How can these people within a network capacity help me? So nowadays it's really networking for me is about understanding whether two of us are actually connect, whether there's a mutual or a shared connection between us. So that would be the first point. The second one would be just being more of a service to other people as opposed to thinking about what's in it for me. So again, when I started out, I guess in my 20s, even late 20s and early 30s, there was a sense of what is in it for me in this interaction with people. Whereas as we've discussed in the last 20 minutes, it's really about how can I be of service to you. And so if I had to go back, that would be one of the other aspects I'd change. I guess the third point also is to be a really good listener. And that is something I've personally done a lot of work on. And we often listen because we have our own agenda and we're not actively listening. We're listening in order to respond. So listening involves asking questions. So I would become a really good listener and actually ask specifically in order to establish what the person is saying. So if someone is saying, I'm frightened and I've had this terrible situation in my work where, the boss undermined me, that is not enough for me to actually draw a conclusion. So I would ask the individual, how does that make you feel? What is the lesson in that? What can you draw from this that would you'd want to use in your next job? What does your ideal employer look like? So if I ask questions, then I'm more inclined to have the answers that the person really wants me to know, as opposed to me trying to figure out their agenda.
Yeah.
And then I guess finally is, just having that sense of questions and clarifications, seeking clarification as opposed to drawing my own conclusions, because sometimes what I'm actually drawing from the discussion or the relationship may not be necessarily what the individual themselves are trying to communicate. So, actively listening, asking questions, and seeking clarification.
Wow. I mean, it's. I guess then I just to kind of follow on that. How do you? I imagine that those are things though that you have learned kind of through trial and error, as well as increased your skill set in the question set asking or the listening capacity or the ability to help and be of service. How do you? I guess. Do you have any particular resources, or are there things that you've done that maybe accelerate that that understanding or that learning, so that you don't have to constantly go through the trial and error of figuring things out?
Yeah, sure. So I guess obviously reading's a really good resource for people, and it's cheap. So reading really good books on the topic, whether they be psychology type subjects that really delve into the psychology of interactions, but also other topics that are related to relationships. So it depends on the genre. So if people are more inclined to read about these topics, then that would be a good starting point. Online courses are fantastic. There are so many online courses these days. You could literally take an online course, within 2 hours, and learn a completely new topic. So exposing yourself to different ways of modalities of learning about the subject and then going out and trialing it. So, for example, for me, online courses, working with mentors. I did a mentoring program with both clinical psychologists and sports psychologists to better understand human behavior. And that was really important. But just learning about it, in 1 hour each week wasn't enough. It was about working with those skills. So for me, it was about practicing. And one of the skills I had trouble with initially was when someone would say something, I would be looking at my notepad and thinking about the next question to ask them. So in my mentoring sessions, it was about actually repeating what the person said and asking them, have I heard you correctly?
Yeah.
So I would say, so what I'm hearing, Lucas, is that you're frightened of being undermined again in your next job. Do I understand you correctly? And so what we're really doing is mirroring that person, and that's active listening.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. No, that answers the question. So I don't have anything else for you. Did you have any final thoughts, comments, questions, concerns that you wanted to share?
I guess, Lucas, it's really about, in the context of relationships, is just understanding that we need to, and need to is not necessarily the strong word, but it's really about coming to appreciate that what we desire most, we need to become first. And people might call it the law of attraction or whatever it might be, but really it's just the understanding that if we want to develop more wholesome relationships, whether they be based on love, whether they be based on mutual respect, friendship, or just understanding that we need to embody those qualities first. So we need to be that quality first in order for our relationships to thrive. And it's just basic understanding, because if we are already that which we seek, then we will recognize it when it pops up in front of us. So if we want more love in our life, then we need to be more loving, because if we are love and we are emanating love and we know what love feels like, then when a person crosses our path, irrespective of whether they're an intimate relationship or a work colleague, then we're going to exude that because we are already recognizing those qualities. And it's the same for friendships and every other relationships. We need to be whatever it is that we want to be first, and then we will recognize it when it pops up into our view.
You're absolutely right. And even from just a physical level, it's like you just said, if let's take it in the sense of, like, if I'm a hustler all the time and I'm constantly grinding and doing a lot of work, you recognize other people who are doing that. So from a very literal perspective of like those qualities. And so if you take that to maybe a more ethereal level of, kindness, compassion, it's very easy to recognize somebody who's genuinely being that, because it's you recognize it from your own personal perspective. So no, that's I am I on the same track as you, though?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and it's recognizing what our wants first. So, for example, you mentioned the hustler, and if you're a pickup artist or you're a hustler, I mean, generally they know themselves to the degree that they know what they want out of the interaction, and for them it might be a fleeting relationship or an interim relationship. Whereas if you take someone on the other spectrum who might be looking for a more deep and meaningful relationship and is thinking about settling down and having kids, then that approach isn't going to work because they're at a different point in their life, but they've probably tried that approach as well. So we need to know what we want first and what our outcomes are, and then that'll dictate how we interact in the world too. And that's just not for a relationship. That's also for jobs. Yeah. If we're entering a job and we want to be, for example, a programmer at Google, but our ultimate aim is to work at Apple, for example, then, we might know that we only want to stay at Google for 1 year and then move on and then settle in at Apple and stay there for 8 years. So that's going to dictate our skill level, how we interact, our level of polishing of our skills and so forth. So it's knowing who we are first and what we want out of life that really helps us bring those skills into our interactions.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, Tony, I have enjoyed this a lot, actually. So thank you for taking the time to do this.
It's been great.
Thank you for watching this interview with Tony Fahkry. I hope you enjoyed listening and were able to learn a little bit more about yourself and how to build better relationships. As I mentioned earlier, Tony created the course, How to Build Powerful Relationships, with links included. If you enjoyed this video, you can listen and watch more at our blog at ryzeapp.co, where we've pulled together some of the top minds to discuss networking, relationship building, and becoming a more connected individual. At Ryze, we've also created the Personal Relationship Manager as a tool to help you organize, track, and build better relationships in your personal lives, which you can check out at ryzeapp.co. See you next time.